Right. Hello everyone, welcome back. We're just going to give it a couple of seconds just to let everyone filter in. Here for our third session today. We're joined by Clive and we're navigating safe business travel for your teams. So lovely to have you, Clive, again. I know we had you
Good
back
to be here.
So, thank you very much. Just going to give it a couple more seconds. They're slowly coming in.
Rightio, no problem.
It's always that moment.
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
Everyone's sort of filtering in.
Yeah. Just imagine if people walking in through the door, that's how I see it, and coming and sit down around a table.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, right, we'll get started. So welcome back, everyone. For those of you who've just joined us, welcome. Managing business travel has become a whole load more complicated, especially after the past few months and recent announcements. So we're absolutely honoured to have Clive Ratton, who is the Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association, here today to provide us with some practical advice. So Clive was appointed as Chief Executive of the Business Travel Association last September, joining from Travel Partnerships and company in Amber Road. He also held the positions at Etihad Travel Airways, HRG, Gulf Air and British Airways. So it's lovely to have you today, Clive. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Right, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to hand you straight over to Clive, who is going to get going. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much and good morning, everybody, and welcome. As I said, I'm delighted to be here and get the opportunity to talk through about navigating safe business travel, which is a bit challenging, if I'm honest, given that there isn't really too much going on right now, and without the prospect of too much happening in the very near future. I think many of us, and I'm sure all of you listening to this are pretty much the same, that it was about getting back in the office and then getting back to business travel. And we saw some positive move on that in early September, and of course it's now all changed. But what I will try and do today is give you some sort of background as to my thoughts and views on how we need to get people back travelling and how you need to manage that process. As a very quick update around business travel from our perspective is that since March it's been pretty quiet across our membership, which is about 86 TMCs. They're about minus 90% down on revenue. So I'm sure you're seeing all of that from your businesses. What that's effectively saying is there is very little or no business travel happening at all. But what we can do is prepare for when it does come back, and hopefully you'll pick up something from that out of this presentation. So now keep my fingers crossed that the technology works. Even though I've been doing this for 6 months, it still makes me nervous pressing the button. There we go. A little bit about the BTA to start off with. Business Travel Association, representing the travel management companies and the wider business travel ecosystem. As I just mentioned, we have 86 members, and before all of this COVID stuff happened, we were responsible for about 11 billion per annum of UK sales, which is a staggering 38 million transactions. So all those bookings you make adds up to 33 million transactions. And we book 11 million room nights in hotels around the globe. We did start off at the beginning with 12,500 staff. Sadly, some of the impact of COVID has hit already, and that number is significantly reduced at the moment, but we still have a great number of people within this industry ready to get back to helping you book and get the UK economy moving once more. Just a quick overview of who some of the members are. I'm hoping all of you are using TMCs, and if you're not, I hope to explain why you should by the end of this little presentation. But you'll see all the major names and some of the less well-known names feature as part of our members and partners as well. So here we are. This is what it's all about. It's around what is safe business travel. And what I'd like to do is just kind of run a little poll, if we can bring that up on the screen, please, just to get your views as to what you define as safe business travel, because it's going to really help me talk through the next kind of 20 minutes or so. So coming up on your screen now, thank you very much. And you can tick as many as you like as what you think will be appropriate, and you can hit those buttons now. So hopefully you can just move your mouse and click over the appropriate box that you think represents safe business travel. and there may be some that are missing on there, I'm afraid, but I try to pick out as many as possible from that. And it's whether or not, I'd be interested also to know, if in questions later on, if you think safe business travel is different to safe leisure travel, and whether you picked that up from any of your colleagues or employees, but that's maybe one for later on that we'll cover off. So we'll just give you a few more moments to make your selections, and we'll see what results come up on the screen. I'd be interested to see. It has been really interesting talking to the government, which I do a lot of, is that my opinion in many ways is that they're trying to get to a zero risk scenario. And if you're looking at the slide still on the screen there's a feature from Channel 4 News that the UK travellers are told there is no risk-free travel, which also was a government department. So you can see some of the quandary that we have, but clearly travel has always carried a certain amount of risk, whether that be leisure or business travel. Okay, so how are we doing? Okay, the poll's gone down, so if we can flick the results up, how easy that is to be done. Wow, it's a fair old spread there. But winners really coming out as stress-free, right? That's pretty important. Reliable, some of these words all kind of lead to the same place, but it's interesting. But good to see zero risk, 67%, and it's quite high given how hard that would be to achieve. Okay, that's great. So yeah, it's really around the stress-free, reliable, easy, and predictable. So okay, we'll try and cover that off a little bit more. So thank you for doing that. Really interesting, and we can hopefully share those results with everybody later on if that's the case. Okay, let's just move on to the next slide. Move down. Okay, so since March 23, when all of this really kicked off for us in the UK, what has changed for business travel? Well, it's an incredible amount of change, not least that you can't travel. So government advice is not to travel. We're still working on FCO advice that either says you can travel or non-essential travel, which means really if you do travel, you're pretty much going against government advice unless there are to a certain number, a very small number of countries that you can travel to, very few of which are business travel destinations. What we've also seen is borders opening up, but more importantly, closing again at very short notice. And that has significant impact on business travel because it creates nervousness and takes away from some of the points you were making on the poll around reliable and stress-free. We've certainly got unpredictable travel advice, whether that's domestically or not. You know, be told to get on a train and go into the office, now told not to get on a train and don't go in the office. If you're in the Northwest, it may be different to what it is in the South. So all of that complexity when it comes to a business travel environment makes it extremely difficult to make any decisions. We've seen most corporates put travel bans on for the very reasons I've mentioned above. And then we had quarantine brought in at some point through June, and that has been an absolute brick wall to break through for business travel, in that companies quite rightly don't want people going over for a 2-day trip and then being caught in quarantine for potentially 10 working days or 14 days at home. Even though all of us have been working from home for the last 6 months, it's just the perception that it puts out there, and that remains as a real barrier to entry for business travel right now. Over the summer, we've seen many companies come out with testing, not least the NHS testing for key workers and now to the wider public. But there are a number of tests that have been rapidly developed over the summer, and more every day, that are making it much more feasible to be able to be tested before travel. And that's one of the things that, as a Business Travel Association, along with both airlines, hoteliers, train companies, including Eurostar, and many corporates that I talk to, are saying we've got to push the government to open up air channels or Eurostar channel to allow people to get back to travelling as long as they test on the way out and test on the way back, without impacting on the national testing capacity that is critically important to public health for the UK, and we'll make sure that's the case. We are struggling with government right now to get that message through, but we will continue to push that, and I think we will get somewhere relatively quickly if anything happens quickly in this current environment. Naturally, for corporates, there's a massive duty of care concerns. What happens if you send one of your employees and they unfortunately catch COVID, or even sometimes worse, talking to some corporates, is they get stuck in a country because of a border is suddenly closed. The other thing that has changed is Zoom, as we're doing today. We've spent our whole lives on Zoom, it seems, for the most part, both in our work lives and also in our public lives. And that has changed the environment for business travel forever, I think, moving forward. But one thing that is absolutely proven to me, and I think many people speak to, and I would like to think many of you feel the same, is it's also proven to me that you will never, ever not want to go and meet somebody in a room somewhere and have a face-to-face discussion with them, whether that's a business meeting, a conference, an event, or just having a social event. We have to get back to traveling. It will have an impact in the longer term, and I'm sure many of you will agree with that, when you're looking at cost as we come out of this, that video conferencing will remain, but it just cannot go away, take it away from that we all need to travel at some point. I think the other key thing that is we're all now being done is where there was some nervousness before about knowing where your employees were at any given time from a GDP and kind of personal information perspective. It's part of our daily lives that we're all tracking and tracing. And I think what is really interesting is the travel management industry have been doing track and trace in some format for many years, really since the terrible events of 9/11, where everybody suddenly realised that as a corporate duty of care, you need to know where your employees are at any given time and being able to get in contact with them. So I think the travel management industry is really well placed for when business travel does come back to really make sure that that duty of care is able to be managed on your behalf. I think the last one I've put in there is fear, and I think this is really interesting. And again, if we get into a bit of a debate at the end, I'd love to hear what you and your kind of colleagues and those that travel think. What we really pick up because of all of the above, but most importantly because of the lack of consistency of information, is that there is a fear about traveling. Not really so much around the getting on an aeroplane or getting on a train. I think the industries have done pretty well in convincing people that it is as safe as anything, as long as you take responsibility for yourselves, which clearly we do need to do. I think it's just about the fear of the unknown and all of those things that roll up above. So for when you're talking about how do we make business travel safe, there is a huge amount for you to contend with and for the whole industry to get this back moving again. So simply, how do you navigate your way around that little lot as I've put there? And I think this is really critical to you as either travellers yourselves or as travel organisers. And my advice is right now we're still in this kind of fallow period where we're not really sure when business travel will start again. There is some happening. Oil and marine businesses have clearly been travelling quite a lot. But there are many that are waiting to get going again, and we're kind of saying that really the most important thing is talk to your cohort, so your company, those that travel, those in HR, senior management around how they feel, but most importantly, listening for all aspects. I think what is going to be really critical to managing safe business travel moving forward is to make sure that we respect the views and the concerns and the opportunities of those that are going to be doing the travelling. And I think there's a role of somebody organising it. If we understand those individual fears and concerns, it is going to make it a little bit easier to manage it, and then understand what it is that you're going to need to do. And what this experience has given us all when it comes to travelling has made it even more personal than it was before. So corporate policies that dictated everybody kind of did the same thing now doesn't really reflect how individuals feel, and companies need to respect that as to recognising that different individuals will feel very differently about what they feel comfortable out doing when they're travelling. So now is the time to really prepare around that and get all of that information if you haven't already, and I'm sure many of you absolutely have done that. But is to get all of the facts down on a piece of paper and understand what is it going to be that makes you get your people back travelling again, what your company objectives are around, well, do we need to travel? How are we going to travel? What are the prospects of our industry needing to travel? And this is to throw in another factor here. I don't know how, all of the companies and industries that you're working in, but we're just about to head into a post-Brexit Britain as well. And trade deals are being signed all over the world to make Britain a global trading nation once more. So many of your companies are going to have to get out there and take opportunities of that, because many doors are kind of being closed a little bit with us leaving the EU, and we've got to go out and fight for ourselves in in the world and in an economic environment. So it's really important around that. So once you've got all of that information, my advice is to then consult with your travel management company if you don't have one. Of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? But the reason that is the case is they can manage all of those expectations for you, put a plan together on how it's booked, and also report back to you on how things are building up and all the constant changing information, government guidelines, rules, what airlines are doing, what train companies are doing, what hoteliers are doing in terms of making their products COVID safe and continue to do so. And then putting in a program working purely in partnership with yourself and delivering that to your end user. And I think it's really important when you talk about business travel safe is one thing that has really changed is the human contact is going to be critical with this. And whilst you may be using online booking tools, many companies right now are saying in the short term, they actually need to speak to humans again to give them the comfort factor and get that immediate information. So that's something else to consider, at least in the short term, if you use those systems. Then, of course, you've got to deliver the program and make it very clear and make sure you get the buy-in from all of your departments, again, whether that's HR from the corporate duty of care perspective, and then also understanding around the cost and signing off around the finances and travel programs. And one thing clearly we've seen with some corporates in terms of making safe travel is that changing travel policies to going out earlier to give people time to get into a hotel and adjust, or travelling in business class or first class for a short period of time to ensure they've got more room. All of those things you needed to weigh up and have in place ready to go when people get back to travelling. Then, of course, it's assessing the success of how it's going, always evolving, and always keep talking to your travel management companies to make sure people are feeling safe. And really, really important is when somebody gets back from a trip, whether that's a domestic train trip or a overseas trip, and I'm sure many of you do this already, but actually reach out to them and say, how was it for you? And it's not just about the actual travel experience, it's about how they felt about it. And if it was good, then it's great to share with other employers and start building that trust and understanding about safe travel. But equally, if it wasn't, then we need to go back to point one of this, of understanding and talking to them about what it was that made them concerned and what we can do to fix that, to keep them traveling in the future. So what have you got to think about? We've covered some of this, but clearly the FCO advice is one thing. We're currently talking to the FCO, and I've got a call with them this afternoon around looking at building a third leveling, because right now it's you can travel, is one advice. The second advice is very much don't travel unless it's absolutely essential, and looking to suggest to them that they should have a third level, which is travel with caution, which would allow business travellers to travel understanding that there is a potential risk from COVID, but it's at a level that the government feels safe is mitigated, because that would allow you to travel a little bit more than maybe you can right now. And secondly, insurance coverage. You would need to check all of your insurance coverages for business travel, but generally if you're travelling against Foreign Office advice, you won't be insured, or your travellers won't be insured, and that clearly is a critical reason for not allowing travel to happen. So by adding a third FCO advice into that, it would help. However, that's not there now, so you need to play by the rules that we've got, and that is simply making sure that your traveller is going to a country that is actually permissible to travel to. Really need to be absolutely nailed on duty of care policy about what your views of your company are about looking after someone if they were to fall ill overseas, or about even sending them in the first place. I mentioned before your company travel policy, that may need reviewing at this current period to reflect the travel restrictions and the needs of making yourself safe from this virus. And I think that is a critical part. If you don't have a policy now and people kind of know it's a non-written policy, now is the time to write a policy, and it doesn't need to be huge. It only needs to be one page if that works for you, about what you can and can't do, both to protect you and your employee from any risk when they're traveling. There's a huge issue, I think, around what is essential travel, and that is for you to decide. And each company will be different to what you think is safe travel. But again, I would absolutely highly recommend that you define what that is, using all of the departments have a vested interest in that, and have it written down and shared with your employees. So again, it's very clear as to what the expectations are on all sides of the party. You need, I think, to have a mechanism in place about whether you need to travel or whether you use something like Zoom. There are ways that your travel management company can help you with that, including return on investment. Again, as I said earlier, face-to-face meetings tend to yield a much higher win rate, particularly in the sales environment, but equally you need to offset against the previous things that you've talked about. And for a safe travel policy, you need, I feel, and my recommendation is to be very clear about what is the need for travel versus doing it on video conferencing. COVID testing, this is a huge thing for you to contend with. We're obviously pushing for it to come in into the UK for airports and ports. And, to be honest with you, I think we really recommending it should be available for offices too. So it needs a test that is quick and easy. They are out there on the marketplace right now. They need to be approved by government, and that's where the stumbling block is. But there are tests that are available that you can do on departure, and you get the results between 30 and 40 minutes. It is our opinion that safe travel would be to test everybody on departure. Therefore, you're sending either a COVID-free plane or a COVID-free train through the tunnel, and the same is done on your return. So that gives you some real safe feeling around at least getting on board your transport mode, that everybody on that flight or train has been tested, and that is the safest way of going right back to my first slide. It is not zero risk. Any COVID test is only a given moment in time, there are always risks beyond that moment of having that test taken. But there are ways, and that's what our role as the Business Travel Association is: push government to get testing in place that allows that very slick but accurate testing for travel. The next issue, even if Boris in his speech this afternoon came out and said, I'm opening all the UK borders and anybody can travel and do what they like, is that you've got the issues of the country that you want to travel to. And those are different pretty much for every single country around the globe. So we need to work with countries that are really critical to the business travel industry to make sure we have air corridors. And many of you may have seen some discussions that are going on around opening up the London to New York air route, which is the biggest business travel route out of the UK for many reasons, to allow people to get back trading again. And that would be very much a secure route because you've got the agreement at both ends of the route, both countries. And I think that is going to be in the short term the future. So you're not going to open up every single country in the world to travel to. Even if you have testing from here, it will still be very much those that agree to a reciprocal testing facility. And we also think that quarantine is still going to be necessary for those countries that clearly have very high risk. Some in South America, for example, if you do have to go, then quarantine is still the right answer. But you have to contend with all of that information. And again, your travel management company has all of those details around it. I think one of the hardest things we've got, and I keep alluding back to this, but is employee confidence about traveling. And some of the polls that we're seeing out there is it just really depends which market sector you're in, what your age is as to your willingness to travel. There are many different reasons around it, but there will come a point where your employer will say, we need to get back to traveling again. Because our business depends on it. Your own economic futures are important for you to go out and get new business or visit customers or go and build something in another country. So what you really need to manage about is that employee confidence and really making sure that they're being spoken to, they're being understood. They feel the confidence of, if they're in a country, they want some advice, they can pick the phone up to speak to someone and give them advice. And again, that is going to be critical moving forward. For some of you may well have, or for many of you, that you will have supplier partnerships and contracts, which are based on volume-based contracts that will give you lower fares or rebates or whatever it might be. Clearly, the world has changed massively with no revenue coming in. You don't know what your targets are going to be. Your volume is certainly not going to be where it was before. So you need to start thinking about what your preferred partnerships are, who they are, and get talking to them now and start understanding what the opportunities are for those relationships moving forward. Because again, if you're thinking about, previously it was just done on price, now it's done about what their facilities are on board their aircraft or in their hotels to keep your employees safe. And it may be that you need to change the criteria of who you work with, or it may be that you stay the same, but it really is critical now to engage with those partners that you use regularly and understand how you're going to work with them in the future. And once more, your travel management company can help you with that. I think you also need to manage customer expectations. There's a lot going around the internet now about people traveling and showing what the experience is, and I think that is really key. Some of the travellers that I've spoken to are kind of just very concerned about what the airport experience is going to be and what they needed to do. You know, it's all new. So I think it's about managing their expectations about what's happening. And there are many areas of information that you can get to help with that. But start planning and telling them now, because travelling safely is about travelling in the know and having people being prepared. And lastly, you know, post-trip reporting, not just about the finances, but it's about how people felt, you know, getting their feedback. We're really working with a couple of companies around almost like a TripAdvisor kind of scenario where people come back and report on how COVID safe they feel in that particular property or in that particular aircraft, and start sharing it with a wider community. So you start building a whole network of information about where you feel safe when traveling. And I think that, again, you know, other people's opinions, the way that we work in a social media heavy world, and listening to other people's opinions are going to be key even for business travel as we establish safe routes moving forward. So how can your travel management company help? And I don't know how many of you have actually flown since this started, but that's the kind of view that you can potentially have now is cabin crew dressed in full kind of medical outfits from the very lovely uniforms that they may have worn before. It's a very different experience. So, you know, your TMC will be your COVID-19 travel advice partner, and never more important than ever is having that information. I've mentioned about booking offline and speaking to an experienced consultant who can guide either you or speaking to your traveller directly to help you through and making sure that they feel safe about everything that they're doing. Clearly, access to information. Our members are already building up where people can get tests from and their availability. It's not a service that we ever thought we'd probably offer as an industry before, but COVID testing is going to be important. I certainly see the future being, whereas all of you that travel will know that you just walk through a metal detector and it's become normal. That wasn't normal many years ago. Having a COVID test or having a health test, actually, because you know, it will be beyond COVID, will become potentially normal too. So we will be part of what we do. Is to make sure that those tests are available and advising you on that. Clearly, we can advise on insurance cover. Really important in this is just making sure that you have got COVID cover and out of that. And lots of other bits and pieces. One thing that is really changing in the industry that makes it safer is the supplier cancellation policies, and safer by meaning that you can change without penalty right now if you feel you can't go or a border closes. So make sure that you're really across all of that. So again, if somebody decides at the last minute they don't feel comfortable changing, your company is not going to be penalised, and your employee again feels safe that they're able to do that. I think the other thing that's come out of this for safe travel is complete itinerary management. Never more important to get it from one source. I actually call it sofa to sofa. So you will book through the same source for everything from your employee leaving home right the way until they get back home. So whether that's, you know, taxi, car, limo, personal friend taking you to the airport, and every step of the way can be tracked from your TMC if it's booked through the central source, and can, more importantly, be traced back if there was a COVID outbreak and you needed to check where your employee is. So keep all of your itineraries booked through an absolute single source. And the other key points on that as how they can help is 24-hour assistance. Again, very much, again, giving your travellers that comfort blanket of if they feel worried or they need to get out quickly, they can pick up the phone 24 hours a day and move to that human-to-human contact, as I've mentioned there, and equally working with you on that post-trip analysis. So what I touched on complete itinerary management, and this is just a diagram that we've done at the BTA. I don't know how well you can see that, to be honest with you, but my eyesight's failing at my age. But what it does is a really good guide for you and for your travellers about what you need to do and think about every step of the way to travel with confidence. And I can make these available to you if you wish to use them. We have one for travelling by air and one for travelling by rail, but it just picks out a step that please advise your travellers to travel safely. And just one area is if you're going to meet a customer or a colleague in an office overseas, what their COVID expectations are. I actually have a meeting in London tomorrow with another association within the industry, and they've sent us a 3-page guide of what to do when I arrive at their offices. And it's not something I'd really thought about before, but clearly I need to comply with their regulations. So it's a really important point of when you're traveling, and if you're going to see somebody, is just making sure that you or the traveller makes contact with where they're heading and make sure they understand what they're going to be facing when they get there. But I can't stress enough, for safe travel is every trip needs to be managed within one place, so you can track and trace if the worst does happen. Okay, I said that I had more information. We've got 2 guides that are available. Travel with Confidence, which is really details the whole process that you've seen from the graphic in much more detail, and equally one, Traveling by Train. It highlights where the issues are. We've been working with the rail industry and with the aviation industry, but particularly with the rail industry for areas like stations, which have been really public places before. Less so, airports have had many years of working, of bringing just travellers in and all of the processes around security. Stations less so. So the Rail Development Group and Rail Tracker manage the stations have been doing some really great work, and some of that is contained within those guides, which are available at the website at the bottom here, which I'm sure if anybody's interested, we can send out afterwards or not, as the case may be. But it just goes back to, how do you plan for safe travel? Is that word plan. You must plan for it. You must involve everybody, and you must review it all the time. And because we're a people industry, and in some ways, my own personal view, we've moved away from it a little bit before. Everybody was doing everything online, and it was all great apps, and they still will be there. But right now, we just need to be able to kind of figuratively put our arms around each other and help each other and guide each other through what is going to be a pretty tricky experience, for at least in the short term. So for me, that's pretty much it. I've just put the pictures up because I travelled. I did my first flight last weekend, and I can say that we went through the whole experience, had a COVID test, and travelled out to Cyprus, which is somewhere that is pretty safe. And it is a pretty okay experience. It's not to say, just get out there and do it. We thought about it, we planned it. But it isn't as scary as maybe some people think it is, and important to get out there. So I hope some of that's been interesting. I hope it's given you some thoughts, and really over to you now if there's any questions.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Clive. We have got some questions in the chat box and also our Q&A. So we'll come to those. Firstly, are you happy for the slides to be shared after?
Of course, yeah.
Requests. Yeah, perfect. So I think I've got a copy of them. If you want to send me over a recent copy, we'll get them out to the audience so they can have a quick look. I've got a quick question for you as well. If people are travelling, what's the situation on the testing at the moment?
Well, if you are travelling, you need to get a test. The easiest way to get it is through going to a private clinic, frankly. And the issue becomes, if you're away from one of the major cities, I think there are some issues in getting access to it. NHS tests are, for some countries, acceptable. You just need to check where you're travelling to as to whether they are. There are very few, to be honest with you, that you need it, but you can get it. There is also a facility at Heathrow, or 2 facilities, one that Heathrow have set up for testing on arrival, but there is also one of our partner companies have got a testing facility just off Heathrow where you can go and get a test and get a result within 24 hours if you needed to do one. The price point is about £150 at the moment, so it's not cheap. But as I said earlier on, there are other testing that are out there that is going to significantly reduce the price. And I think we will get to a point in the not too distant future where it's more like a kind of £35 to £40 price point. But, at the moment it is a little bit more expensive. Okay,
thank you. Okay, so I'm going to come to the chat box first. We're going to share details. We've also got a question here, if the guides could be sent out after. Is that possible as well?
Yep, absolutely, yeah. You can download them off the website, so I can send a link to it. So not a problem.
That's lovely, thank you. Julian said, is there any information on what's required from the 1st of January 2021 when going or returning to Europe?
From a Brexit point of view, I guess that means rather than a COVID perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point. Right now, nothing really changes in what it is as you would travel right now, other than you need to take a valid passport and that kind of stuff, and you'll need to go through a different queue when you arrive, which is already happening now in some countries. But we still have to fight through an aviation agreement that hasn't been done yet. it could mean some disruption. I don't think it will, because it's not in anybody's interest to happen. But right now there is still an awful lot to be sorted out from a travel perspective. But I wouldn't, consider that a big concern if you're planning a trip right now. We have to find a way through it. If we didn't before with COVID, we've all got to get back traveling at some point. So we need to make sure that it will happen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I think there was reference in Brexit.
Yeah.
I've just seen on the chat box, same question. Someone else has asked, it's an anonymous question, where can I find a list of countries that are considered safe by the FCO?
Well, that's on the FCO website. If you go onto their travel advice website, it can be tricky to find because they've done it in all countries are not safe to travel to, and they list the exemptions rather than the other way around, which is easier. But if you go onto that site, I can't remember the exact website right here and now, but I can send it to you afterwards for sharing. But it's all listed on there, and the exemptions are on the first page on the click through. There's not many to look through, sadly.
Lovely. No, thank you. Yeah, I'll put that all together and I'll definitely make sure that goes out to the attendees. We have another one here. Have travel management companies incorporated pandemic clauses to their contracts with the hotel suppliers?
Oh, well, that's a really valid question and a good question. And I think it is really part of ongoing work with the hotel industry at the present time. And now there's two areas. One is transient hotels and what that means. And as I alluded to in the presentation, lots of them are waiving cancellation charges if there were any, or your advance booking. If you're talking about meetings and events, which is, much more difficult, yes, when your TMC is negotiating with a hotel, they will make sure that there are clauses within that allow you to change or cancel in the event of a lockdown or whatever the case may be. So that is part of the role. Whether the hotels agree to them is another matter. That's part of what we do with the hotel industry, saying we've got to have a consistent policy about how people react to that. And in this world, whether it's airline or hotel, we all need to be a bit more flexible, at least in the short term, and understand that events and flights and things may change at short notice, and customers shouldn't be penalised for that, because that's just going to scare people from travelling again.
Okay, thank you, Clive. Sarah's asked, and then I'll come on to Samantha's question after. Sarah's asked, is it a business requirement to ask employees to get tested before and after travel, or is it a legal requirement? Is testing also only compulsory for business trips or also for personal trips?
Well, right, trying to pick those in order. Testing is only compulsory for the country that require them as a compulsory test, if that makes sense. So, for example, I went to Cyprus, it was compulsory, I had to take one, or they wouldn't let me on the flight. I'm flying in this weekend to Turkey, and they don't need it on arrival unless you're tested, so there's no legal right. From a company's point of view, there is no legal case that needs to get tested at the present time. Many companies are viewing if they can get testing to get people back in the office, is to, if you can have a quick test, is have people come in, test and go into the office. They know they've got a COVID safe environment within the office that morning. But right now, there is no legal requirement, as there isn't for the testing through the NHS. You just go if you have symptoms from that point. But for travel, there's nothing that is absolutely legal other than it's recommended to do it, and it gives you peace of mind as well, of course.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to come on to Samantha's question now. Do you have any information on managing mental health whilst travelling in these times? I suppose that's quite important with all the change at the moment.
It's massive, actually. We've done some sessions on mental health and how that can be managed through this process. And I think it is absolutely a critical part of any travel policy moving forward, or any coming back to work policy, frankly, is that we've all at some point suffered through mental health, whether we know it or not. It's just the kind of highs and lows of this whole scenario. So I think when again back to travel, it's really important. We work with companies that put mental health first aiders training in place that can help those people. And that's why I say when somebody comes back off a trip, is ringing up and asking how they really are, not just how the trip went, are all critical parts of building in a mental health policy. And I think any company now worth their salt is going to make sure that that's considered right away from asking people about how they feel about travelling, and recognising their concerns and worries and dealing with those and offering assistance. Wellbeing is absolutely more so than ever a critical part of any travel policy, and it's not just mental health, it's about the whole kind of how fit you are to travel, and making sure that companies recognise that because mental health comes from many issues, not just feeling anxiety about how you actually your whole body functions. So it's critically important.
Thank you. I've got one more question. Sorry, excuse me, in the chat box. Unless anyone else has anything else they want to ask, just pop it in either the chat or the Q&A, and I'll come back to it just after this one. I've got here, what are the requirements for group travel, please?
I'm not sure the context of that, but I mean, right now, if you were traveling overseas, it's different. If
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a meeting in the UK, a business meeting, it is still possible to do that up to a certain number. I can't, right off the top of my head, think what that number is. I think it's 30 at the present time. But I may be wrong because it's changing so quickly. This is the issue. But if you're traveling overseas, for example, you're booking a group on an airplane, that's absolutely fine. You can all travel. This is the irony of it all, is you could book 30 or 40 people on a flight all traveling on the same flight together. But when they get to the hotel, they can go in a meeting room together if it was a domestic flight. So group travel is really on an individual basis, depending on where you're going and what you're doing. Going to a hotel or going on a train or a plane is different. But it is still pretty difficult to do groups right now for the very reason of all the restrictions that are around. Okay.
I think that's all the questions that we've got. As I said before, I will put together a nice email with Clive's presentation on the links which everyone's asked for those booklets and everything, and we'll get them out after, along with Clive's contact details should anyone want to ask him anything else after. So that's it. So lovely. Thank you so much, Clive.
Thank you, as always.
It's been a great presentation. Lots of food for thought for us all. And we're going to be back again at 12:20 for our panel debate on live and virtual events. That's another one that keeps changing. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.